Hi, welcome back to the developer sessions here at EGX 2016. I am extremely excited about this next panel, so I'm just going to introduce it and get the hell off the stage. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Paul and Joe from 65 Days of Static.
Hi. Hi.
Hello.
Not even half full. It's like one of our gigs. I'm Joe. This is Paul. We're from a band called 65 Days of Static. In case you don't know who we are, which is likely, we formed in Sheffield in 2001 or 2. We're not sure, and we made 7 records. The 7th being the soundtrack to No Man's Sky, and we've toured the world a few times and had a lot of fun. So you can find all our records on the internet, or download them, or buy them over there somewhere. And we'd encourage you to do that because that's one of the ways that we make our small living. So in 2013, we were approached by Hello Games to initially to license a track for a trailer for this game, which we starting to realise you've all probably heard of and probably harbour unreasonably strong opinions about. But this one email developed into us signing on to write the whole soundtrack for No Man's Sky, and it's about 2.5 years ago. So just to be clear, we're going to talk a little bit about doing that. Is our first soundtrack, our first game soundtrack, and so this is sort of how we did it. This is where we fit into the general scheme of things. We're just a very small part of a bigger, a much bigger sort of machine that was moving forward. Paul Weir's the audio director for Hello Games, so even though we were writing music, ultimately we sent it all to Paul, and he was responsible for incorporating it into the overall sound design, which is a system called Pulse, you can see there. And because No Man's Sky is procedurally generated, I'm sure you all know what that means. I didn't 2 years ago, but I do now. It's really, really big, so we needed the music we composed to be part of that and to sort of live up to that scale. But at the same time, we wanted what we were writing to be released as our next record. That was sort of a given from the start. That's what we wanted to happen with the music. So we needed to write linear music, but we also needed to make sure that music could be utilized by the game. And we're going to try today to demonstrate really briefly how the tension between those tasks, writing a record and writing music for a procedural game, actually became really useful aspect of the project, and helped us focus on the strength of each particular context, the album and the game. So Paul's going to...
Yeah. Okay, so this is a list. We're pretty good at making lists as a band. These are some of the points of tension that we figured out based on writing music that needed to work in an album form, like we would write a regular album, but would also work in the game. On the left are qualities that we usually find important when writing more traditional songs, and on the right are the demands of making music as a generative soundtrack. So, like, finite versus infinite is a pretty obvious one. The in-game soundtrack needed to go on forever, but the record didn't. In fact, when we write records, we figured out that the best length for a 65 record is as short as we can possibly make it, which is always a lot harder than it ought to be. We kind of have a 45-minute goal, usually, but don't always get there. Linear versus non-linear is to do with the arrangements of the songs and the arrangement of an album. An album can be designed with a fair expectation that people will listen in order from start to finish, or at least will do that on a song-by-song basis. You know, they'll listen to the entirety of one song. But in the game, the player isn't playing the game to aid the music. The music has to be ready to change at any given moment. no piece of music, or even part of a piece of music, can rely on the context or its place amongst other pieces of music for it to work. It has to stand up in its own right. Focused versus responsive. This is sort of the difference between telling a story and creating an environment in which stories can be imagined, maybe, or the feeling of being led by the hand versus the feeling of exploring. In the context of being a band making a record, we're always going to opt for the former, even if we're making 20-minute pieces of drone music, which isn't that unusual. We'd still approach it in this fashion. The song has to have a purpose. It needs to know its purpose. We're all fans of music that take the other approach and force the listener to engage a bit more actively, but it's not what 65 tend to do. Standalone versus context-aware, that's just us recognizing that when you buy a traditional soundtrack record, it doesn't always flow like a normal record. It can be a bit of a lazy cash-in. It'll have weird short tracks. It'll have variations on the same theme over and over again. It doesn't necessarily work as a listening experience without being attached to that specific piece of action that it's soundtracking. We wanted the No Man's Sky album to work as an album completely separate to the game. But obviously in the game, the music needs to sound like it knows what it is accompanying. Event-based composition versus state-based composition. I think that's the language that computer game people tend to use. I guess it means the difference between writing for a specific definable event that's always going to happen in a game. And that suggests a certain amount of temporal or emotional control over how you're writing the piece of music. But state-based is more like write music for a space battle of an indeterminate length. It's a very different requirement. And then using the whole mix versus coexisting with the sound effects, it wasn't so much a problem for us, it was more a problem for Paul Weir, who obviously was responsible for the whole sound of the game. We tried to keep it in mind, not for the record, we didn't let that compromise the mixes of the songs, but within the game, for example, there's a bunch of synth sounds that you can hear on the track Supermoon from the record that couldn't be used in the game because they sounded a bit too much like spaceships taking off. So that changes the music that you're able to write. Above all, though, as we were approaching the project, the thing that we agreed on with Paul Weir and Sean Murray at Hello Games was that the real challenge we wanted to overcome was to make the in-game soundtrack transcend the usual limitations of generative music. We wanted the game to have all of the qualities we try and include in our records, so big soaring melodies, strong sci-fi hooks, sadness, controlled noise, all the reasons that we tend to make music to explain ourselves in the first place. Not just a range of responsive, Eno-esque, granular, ambient environments that fit more easily into the requirements of responsive, generative soundtracks.
So we figured out that in order to capture that sort of intensity for the in-game audio, we needed to write an actual record first. Making generative music that works technically is relatively easy, as we'll explain. But as we're going to demonstrate, to make music with the personality of scores like Blade Runner or Star Wars or something that you recognize and has that emotional resonance, we needed to write actual focused compositions and tear them up afterwards. So this is the record that we made, and it's a 65 Days of Static record in the sense that if No Man's Sky didn't exist, it would still be a record that we'd be proud of, and we do think it's pretty good. So as it's the only part of the game that we actually make any money on, we put a big picture of it here. You can recognize it when you buy it. This is the quadruple vinyl version of the album, and in the end, the record was sort of around 50 minutes. We did sort of make a record that was fairly concise, but we ended up releasing a whole lot of other material that we'd written for the game. I'm aware that I'm scratching my head a lot. It's because I haven't had any press training. You wouldn't see Tony Blair doing that, would you? But you can't trust him. You could trust me, so it's fine. Where am I? The generative stuff in No Man's Sky, I don't know if anybody's got it and has played it. I haven't since it was released, but all the music on it stems from this record. There's other music in the game that isn't on the record, but it's all based on the compositions on this record. We are hoping to do an audio update on the game at some point, but for now, all the music in the game does come from here. So, I hope this works.
Yeah, right, okay, so this is a visualization that we made to demonstrate exactly what we wrote for the music that you can hear in the game. It's not anything to do with No Man's Sky or Hello Games, it's just a way that we thought might be useful to explain ourselves. Every piece of text that appears represents an instance of audio that is playing, taken from a pool of audio files. The names tend to be related to the songs that they come from. So if you know the record, you might recognize the names of some of the songs here. This particular soundscape combines...
Just down a bit.
This particular soundscape combines elements from 2 or 3 different songs. So, if this works, you can see the various different names of audio files that we've made that are either taken from the recordings of the songs or taken from sessions that we did after the songs had been written, where we generated pools, like libraries of sounds, depending on the instruments that we were using for each particular song. This red bar at the top represents an interest level. So if I turn the interest level up, you'll hear more audio and different audio coming in. Paul Weir, the audio director, suggested that we think about the music in this way because we were producing the audio separately from the game's development. We were up in Sheffield by ourselves, and they were down in Guildford. So we had no way of knowing exactly how they would use the music and what kind of behaviors they might end up tying the interactivity of the music to. We just needed to be able to say, when you want the music to do more stuff, these are the things that should come in according to this logic in this order. Also, soundscapes like this needed to work with similar soundscapes for other environments. So if I just go over here, this is a bit messy because we don't really know how to make computer games, but it should change to a different but complementary soundscape. And again, you can see some of the same instruments playing, but there's different things going on here too. And again, depending on where the interest level is, which would be tied to the game mechanics, will change the amount of stuff coming in and the different things that are actually playing. So that's that.
Oh, it's just me now.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's still me. So this is a diagram to explain what was just going on there. Right, okay. The first set of elements that you see at the bottom here, the guitars, the strings, the modular synth, the pads and the piano and so on. These are all the individual sound files. And what you heard in that demo was, first of all, a planet sound environment, and then secondly, a space audio environment. They were written in threes. There'd also be a wanted mode, which would be a more high-energy kind of sound environment for perhaps if you're getting into a space battle or attacked on a planet or something like this. I mean, for us, it was just 3 sound environments which would make up one soundscape. Each of the sound environments would have many, many pools of different audio and rules, and 3 would make up a single soundscape, and then we made lots of soundscapes. Joe's going to talk through now the actual specific stuff that we used.
Yeah, so this is a piece of software called Fmod, and it's free audio software. You can go and get it now if you're online, used for game sound design. So to be really clear, it's nothing unique or specific to No Man's Sky. It's just something freely available. And this is the system that we built for composing generative audio. Not to be confused with the actual No Man's Sky system Paul Weir was building elsewhere. We knew we wouldn't have access to that because it was being built until quite late on in the project's development, and we knew all of this from the start. So that's why we developed this to mock up how we thought the audio we were making would work in the game, and eventually all of this was that you're hearing now was put into the game's audio system, and that's how the audio operates according to that other system. As you can see, Fmod isn't particularly visual, hence Paul's brilliant computer graphic thing before. But if we just run it, you should be able to hear that each of these blocks here represents those pools of audio. So there's not just one piece of audio there, there's several inside each one, and they sound the same, like this. They're very slight variations of a noise, or we'll just play that for a minute. In other cases, each block represents a pool of variations which develop more sonically, so they're not quite the same. There's different instances of sound that relate very closely to each other, like this. So you can hear there's different notes there, and there's different sort of levels of intensity. Yeah. This is another track called Husk, which was the working title of a track which made the record called Temporal Descent. And incidentally, a lot of the tracks we wrote did have working titles from sci-fi, which we renamed later when we released the record. We didn't rename all of them, because having a track on your record called Asimov is really cool, but having a track called Fox Mulder isn't so cool. So we knew early on that the rhythmic stuff like this was only really going to be used in the more dramatic moments of the game, where there'd be a lot of other diegetic noise happening, spaceship noise and animal noise and gun noise and so on. So locking things into a stricter BPM like this runs the risk generally of sounding repetitive a lot more quickly, even if there's a great deal of randomization, the brain feels like it's hearing the same thing. So in those busier moments of the game, we could embrace the repetition a bit more and build it a bit differently. So these arpeggiated synths are from a track called Monolith, and they could be used because the timing is so rigid, whereas the more ambient scenarios you've just heard would trigger more loosely, and if there was stuff like this in it, it might lead to really rhythmic stuff jarring or overlapping. So
Sorry.
that's that. No, that's all right. It's quite loud in this monitor.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right.
I hope that made sense.
So those three sound environments, the two in the first demo and this wanted one, that would be one single soundscape. And like I said before, we made lots of those. So by providing that volume of material, the game begins to produce the illusion of an endless soundtrack. What's really going on is like a highly orchestrated kind of randomization, but with lots of rules and logic. So audio that's rhythmically or tonally unrelated or out of sync is just not going to collide, but there's lots of ways in which complementary audio will. What's really exciting to us musically is that there's a lot more that could be done here in our system, a lot more logic that we could put in, maybe even incorporate digital synthesis for genuine procedural music. There's an exciting future there. But we weren't writing standalone generative music for ourselves. The No Man's Sky project had very specific needs, so we made our system work accordingly.
Monkey Island, yes. Even 20 years ago, then, to sum up, games like Monkey Island had basic generative music. In this case, a system called iMuse, which allowed the music to respond in basic ways to where the player went. So cynically, you could suggest that what we're doing is really nothing new, but there is something new going on, which is that we're not people who make computer games, and we're not people who make computer game music. We're a weird instrumental band who make music for entirely different reasons. We're interested in technology to make that music, but we're not approaching composing from a programming or practical perspective. We're naive in a useful way. So, to be honest, even though I've just explained Fmod to you, I don't really understand how it works. I understand what it does, but if you put me in front of it, I wouldn't be able to use it. Paul would be able to, I wouldn't. So I'm just a guitar player interested in making lots of noise who happens to have ended up in a situation where I'm making music for a computer game, which is precisely the point. And as other musicians like us start to get involved in computer game music, it's hard to deny that gaming is providing a spectrum of creativity comparable to any other art form you care to mention. We're not here because of our expertise in programming or coding or writing music for games. We're here because we're experts at being 65 days of static and making something messy and compelling and bringing that to the game. So we put the emotional elements, if you like, of the music over the practicalities of making it happen. We don't care what's not possible. Thanks.
Thanks.
And thank you. You can ask us, I think we'd love to hear, if you wanted to ask us any questions, there's going to be a microphone in this aisle here, and you can just come and ask us a question. We'd love you to. You're welcome to. Be brave, yeah.
Yeah, do it.
Hi.
I spotted on your 4-record set that the labels look like they have either something black printed on them or chunks out of them. What is that?
Right. So when we came to make the artwork, we worked with a really great friend of ours called Casper, who's a designer, and I guess initially we'd also worked with an artist called who did the drawing?
John DeLuca.
John DeLuca, who did the drawing, and that was going to be the main record. But we felt that there was something too sci-fi about it. Like No Man's Sky obviously has this hugely strong sci-fi aesthetic, and we didn't want to just replicate that in our own artwork because we wanted the record to stand alone. So I can't remember how the huge black slabs came about, but they were really part of this conversation we were having about making it feel more malevolent and more disconnected with the game, and somehow like cracking that alternative reality that the game's trying to create, and I guess we were coming from somewhere more real, and we wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, because from the beginning it was because the only creative brief we got from Hello Games was to make a 65 Days of Static record, which was really flattering, but it was a very big distinction for us between doing that and being sort of composers for hire. So if we were going to put our whole being into making the soundtrack, it needed to be our next record as well, in a way that we could sort of feel like we could really stand behind it proudly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it does exist. It also exists in a more traditional No Man's Sky aesthetic, but we also needed a version that was our own. And why wouldn't you put massive black slabs over beautiful sci-fi drawings?
And it is over there somewhere, and you don't have to buy it, but you could go and look at it. It's on a stand over there, and you can see the black. It looks cool. Yeah.
I'll check that out.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, first off, thanks for coming. I'm sure everybody appreciates it.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Sean Murray is obviously a big fan.
Less so now, I think.
Was you guys hesitant at all about doing such a project? Or do you just take it in your stride and go, well, this is what it is, this is what we're going to do?
About us being on the project?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think...
Being involved from like a creative perspective and doing what you're doing now. I mean, you didn't envision, for example, 3 years ago, going into video games.
Sure. I think Sean Murray, who is, for anybody who doesn't know, the owner of No Man's Sky, or the guy who developed, the director of No Man's Sky, I think he quite consciously gave us a great deal of creative freedom. Like, we weren't really provided with a particularly heavy set of specifications. He wanted us to do what we did. Obviously, it wasn't quite that simple because we had to work out all this other stuff, but in terms of writing the record, he really wanted it to sound like something that we do. And that worked really well because we almost felt like we had a very real responsibility. We weren't just composers for hire, we were being given the responsibility of bringing something musical to the game. we sent them some demos really early on. And they thought it was the record, and they said, yeah, more of this. So from quite an early point, we were encouraged to push the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that answers it.
Yeah. Well, and unbeknownst to him, we'd started doing like sound installations and stuff as well a few years ago before we got into this project. We were starting to look at music in a more or a less linear way, writing for space rather than writing just chunks that were songs. So we'd sort of accidentally primed ourselves to do something a bit like this, I think. So it was intimidating, but we felt like we were ready for it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers. Hello.
Hiya.
Hi.
If there was one movie soundtrack you could rewrite, what would it be and why?
Well,
It's a hard question because you don't want to pick a good one, because why would you want to rewrite it?
well, we already sort of did it. We rescored a film called Silent Running, which is a sci-fi from '76, Douglas Trumbull film set in space, which has a brilliant soundtrack by Joan Baez, but I'm not sure why Joan Baez is soundtracking a sci-fi film. So we already rewrote that, I guess. I don't know. I can only think of soundtracks that I hate, and I don't want to be negative about it.
Yeah, it'd be more exciting to get involved in another soundtrack to a film or something that's yet to be made, something new, That said, no, I don't know. It would have been good to get the Blade Runner 2 thing, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. Who's doing that?
Johan Johansson, I think.
Great. I'm sure they'll do a great job.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when it comes to your music being put into the game, how much can be done to it in separating it and putting it through systems before it's no longer considered the music that you originally wrote?
That's a brilliant question.
It's a good question. It's a question that lawyers are not ready for.
Yeah.
I can tell you that. I don't think anyone's figured out the answer. I mean, on paper, we wrote some songs for Hello Games. That's about as clever as the lawyers managed to figure it out. But obviously, that's a long way from what happened. So, creatively speaking, that's a really interesting, fuzzy middle ground, because Paul Weir was primarily responsible for all of the logic to create these soundscapes within the game. We had a great working relationship with him. We had a few ideas, and he took on board some ideas, which was really nice. But we made all of the sounds. He designed the algorithms. I think somebody else coded the algorithms. Anything that's happening in the game, technically, even if it might sound similar from time to time, is technically almost certainly happening for the first time in that combination. So it's really exciting to think about who's actually fully responsible for that music.
And just to be clear, we had an incredible creative experience with those people doing that, and it wasn't until lawyers got involved and just couldn't understand what was going on that anything painful happened at all. So I think as long as everybody's working towards the same goal, it doesn't ultimately matter. We have this record, it's our record, there's a game that exists, and hopefully the music in it really, really works with the game. So everyone sort of came out feeling like they'd been part of something. Lawyers were terrible, basically. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks again. Cheers.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I, for one, am extremely glad that Tony Blair couldn't make it today. I think you can all agree that was fascinating, so please do give another very warm round of applause for Paul and Joe. Thanks.